Now, Ukraine is, of course, under a full-blown Russian invasion. Hundreds of Ukrainians are, of course, fleeing from the war. Many have crossed over into Poland, some into Hungary and others into Romania. Tensions are high with the safety of Ukrainians. This, as a humanitarian crisis, is now beginning to unfold in Europe. Our next report gets you the details.
Desperate Ukrainians are fleeing the Russian invasion, flooding highways, trains and bus stations. And Europe is bracing for an influx. That of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. Beelines of cars rushed out of Kiev. This shortly before Russia began bombing civilian areas in the Ukrainian capital. Russian troops are now inching closer to Kiev.
I'm from Lviv. The mood is patriotic. I'll take my children away and return. We will fight this off. Ukraine will win no matter what.
In the meantime, the United Nations has called on European countries. This to keep their borders open for the displaced Ukrainians. According to the UN Refugee Agency, around 100,000 people have already fled within Ukraine. Thousands more have taken shelter. Where? In neighbouring Poland and Hungary. Meanwhile, Poland's border is opening 9 reception centres, offering meals and medical care to the Ukrainian refugees. This train arrived in the Polish town of Przemyśl on Thursday. Hundreds of passengers on board from eastern Ukraine's Kharkiv. Some 15,000 Ukrainians have already crossed over to Poland since the invasion, a figure quoted by border authorities.
We've actually been very lucky to get out of Ukraine with the second to last train that was coming here. We've spent last 16 hours using all of our luck coming here. Many of our friends will get refugee status, but we are fortunate enough to have our accommodation planned. And we are very happy that we have our friends in Poland that are ready to help our people.
Meanwhile, Kharkiv too was rocked by explosions. Smoke billowing from buildings. The panic is palpable at the Luzhanka border crossing. It connects Hungary with Ukraine, currently packed with hundreds of cars. Hungarian authorities are sending troops to the border. This to deal with the refugee influx. Sounds of sirens and missiles resonated all day across Ukrainian cities. Residents scrambled to take shelter in underground subway stations. Meanwhile, in the strategic port city of Mariupol, houses were on fire and buildings were damaged. Russian troops launched extensive missile attacks across the city. A massive upsurge of attacks was seen in the Donbas region. The territory is now controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Multiple buildings destroyed and dozens of lives lost. Residents are now ramping up efforts to evacuate the region.
In around 3 minutes, another one came here, right into the factory workshop, and those people were hit who didn't have time to hide.
As many as 5 million Ukrainians could be displaced. This, according to Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. She is the US representative to the United Nations. For Europeans, the massive humanitarian crisis could be the greatest since World War II. Are the United States and its allies prepared? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Now, the war in Ukraine is, of course, expected to spark off a crisis of refugees. People who are fleeing from the war in Ukraine are crossing over the borders into Romania, Hungary, Slovakia and Poland. And many people, of course, who are fleeing happen to be women and children. And men of fighting age have been told to stay behind. Now, Mariana is one of the thousands who has fled from Ukraine and has crossed over from Slovakia, struggling to hold back the tears at the border. She's called for peace.
Через воєнний стан у нас всі військовозобов'язані, всі чоловіки повинні воювати за країну, щоб був мир, щоб не наступали ворожі сили і все було у нас добре. Ми мусимо з дітьми виїжджати з України.
At the Polish border, many waited for several hours in freezing conditions to leave Ukraine. Poland has the region's largest Ukrainian community of nearly about 1 million people. And authorities have said that the waiting time to cross the border ranges anywhere from 6 to 12 hours in some places. And for those who crossed the border, they were offered free transport. The Polish locals have rushed to help the Ukrainians move to western cities in the country. Meanwhile, in neighbouring Moldova, the scenes were very similar. Authorities set up 2 humanitarian centres in the northern villages where refugees from Ukraine are being offered basic aid for about 72 hours. Medical staff and social workers are also available here. And authorities have said that those arriving from Ukraine will not need to show COVID-19 passes, while minors only need to show a birth certificate. Neighbouring Romania is also witnessing an influx of refugees from Ukraine. About 10,000 Ukrainians have entered into Romania through its 6 border checkpoints.
I'm from Kiev. I traveled with my family to Western Ukraine just for vacation when it happened. So we decided yesterday that we want to leave the country because it's not clear what will be happening. I have a lot of my relatives in Kiev who are sitting in the bomb shelters right now because there is a bombing everywhere and people are afraid and scared. So we want to leave Ukraine right now, but I think that there is no possibility for men to leave. So we need to decide. I have a 5-year-old kid and I have also my sister who has 2 kids. So we are really scared and don't know what will happen here.
Now, the United Nations has called on the European nations to keep their borders open for the displaced Ukrainians. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, nearly about 100,000 people have already fled within Ukraine. It is said that the invasion could, of course, drive another 5 million Ukrainians to flee abroad.
So we have reported that we've seen, we're aware of reports of substantial movement within Ukraine, but also across borders. So our latest understanding of this is that there are more than 100,000 people who we estimate to have left their homes and may be displaced inside the country. And we're also aware of several thousand who have crossed international borders in the region.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.